black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Why America is like this. You want to understand why America is like this? Why Trump happened, why the rot keeps spreading, why cruelty isn't a bug, but the feature? It's not a mystery, it's the oldest story we've never told honestly, and until we face it, we will keep collapsing into darker versions of ourselves. This country was not founded on freedom. It was founded on stolen land, cleared by slaughter, and built by stolen people, broken by force. That is the foundational transaction. Everything else is decoration. We did not reckon with the genocide of native peoples. We mythologized it. We made westerns about it. We named football teams after the dead. We paved over bones and called it destiny. We did not reckon with slavery. We declared it over and then immediately wrote new laws to replace chains with prison bars. We never paid for the centuries of free labor, for the children sold, for the torture, for the theft of time and breath and lineage. We made a new America, but left the engine intact. The Confederacy lost the war but won the memory. We let them rewrite history in marble. The monuments didn't go up in 1865, they went up in the 1950s, not as remembrance but as warning. We never cleansed the institutions. The racists became sheriffs, the sheriffs became senators, and the logic of white supremacy adapted, changing shape, changing code, but never losing its grip. That's why America elects racists, not in spite of our history, but because of it. When the mask slips and the candidate says the quiet part out loud, it doesn't alienate the country. It clarifies it. Trump didn't invent any of this. He just said it without shame. And for millions, that was the fantasy. A man who would take every buried cruelty and wear it like a crown. This is why they're banning books, why they're rewriting curricula, why the very mention of racism or history now sets off alarms, because they know what we'd find if we looked too closely. A country terrified of its own reflection. Reparations aren't radical, they're overdue. Truth-telling isn't divisive, it's the only way out. And if we don't learn from Germany, if we don't enshrine what happened, criminalize its symbols, and build laws that make it unrepeatable, then we are telling the future exactly what we're willing to tolerate again. America doesn't confront its breaking points. It buries them, calls it pride, wraps it in anthem and flag. But buried things don't disappear. They grow back meaner. And we are running out of time to break the cycle.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. For those who might be new to the show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. This is part two of a two-part show that I'm doing based, I guess, by the video clip that you saw on the intro to this show. That's a question that I think is pertinent to what's going on now in America today with the political climate and the race issues that we're still having, okay? And in the first show, I tried to started explaining, going back to colonial time, that America has always been separated, okay? For those of you who think that we have always been some kind of United States in name, but we're just like any young growing country. When you have countries like Kemet that's thousands of years old, or China that's thousands of years old, and other cultures that are thousands, we're about the American at large is 250 years old from 1776 to 2025. With 249 right now, but we go back another couple of hundred years to 1600s, that we still have some growing pains. But we also have a psychosis, a thing called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when a truth that you were taught and believed in run into a truth that contradicts what you thought has been always your truth. And white America is facing that right now and having a lot of issues. There are white anti-racism allies out there like Tim Wise and Jane Elliott. You might be familiar with her, and she was the one who did the brown-eyed, blue-eyed baby kids thing back in the 60s after Martin Luther King was assassinated, who are out there doing that work, talking to white America, okay, those who are listening. But right now with the 24/7 news media and the kind of people that we got in charge of this government now, who are boldly putting forth such nonsense of white supremacy and whiteness as the model, that has ignoring all the contributions of people that look like me, Latinos, Native people, Asian people, all the other part of the American population, and it's causing problems. And that's because when you don't deal with a psychological issue, like America is refusing to deal with its original sin and human trafficking. I don't use the word enslavement, slavery, because there are no human beings called slaves. They were human beings trafficking. And it was done not only by the Americans, but England and France and Denmark and all the other European countries who benefited from the human trafficking system that was established. That established the modern capitalist system that made these countries into the powerhouse they are today. And you had to face that truth. It was all on the backs of people that looked like me. And in fact, there was a war over 150 years ago that happened here in America called the Civil War. That was like the came to a head. All the discussions that were similar to what's going on today. You think that what you're hearing in the news media is original? No, it happened in the 1840s, in the 1850s, and it reached a head in the 1860s when some 11 that kind of coincide with the red states decided they were going for their own, and that wasn't going to happen, and it was a civil war. But I want to start with this image here in connection with that. I ended with this image, but I thought I'll start the second part with this image again. And this gentleman has a lot to do with what's going on with the Confederacy. Many of you might not know who he is. Let's go on to the next image, and I'll explain. That photograph you saw is that of the Vice President of the Confederate States of America. His name is Alexander H. Stevenson. He's from Georgia. He was a well-known United States senator during the 50s, during all those periods of turmoil and talks and the Dred Scott decisions, or bloody Kansas, all that time. He was going on. He was a senator during that period of time. But he, like a lot of folks who were in Congress at that time, they betrayed their oath of office and formed this government called the Confederacy. Some of you might not agree with my description of it, but that's what happened under Buchanan, who was the president prior to Lincoln. Okay, Lincoln took the office after Buchanan, but Buchanan did nothing. In fact, the vice president of the United States under Buchanan became a Confederate general, and you had senators and congressmen either becoming generals or forming their own Congress in the South. First in Montgomery, then went on to Richmond. But this is what he said on March 21st, 1861 in Savannah, Georgia, his home state, just a few weeks before the official start of the Civil War, Fort Sumter, on April 12th, 1861. He gave a speech known today as the Cornerstone Speech. You can look it up on YouTube. Just look up his name and that speech. But let's go on to the next. Okay, this speech was explaining to the North and the states, northern states and to the world, that the cornerstone of his new government, this thing called the Confederacy, was the belief that that people of African descent in this country, America, never was and never will be the equal to white people and enslavement was their normal and natural condition. This is how they thought. And anybody who fought under the Confederate flag was fighting under this ideology that we, as people of African descent, were not the same as them. Like I said in the last show, it was a caste system that was established by the first rendition of the Constitution. We were 3/5 of the human being. During that period of time, we were treated like the animals on the plantation. That's where we were identified with. So we would not consider. So how could you have that kind of ideology and that same flag and those statues that these men represent are being put back on America, and the American flag was shot at by these guys, okay? Yep, they're going to put their name back on army bases and put monuments back up on top that produce this kind of ideology. This is what he had to say. Let's go on to the next one. He said this in that cornerstone piece. Our government foundations are laid, and its cornerstone, the cornerstone of this government called the Confederacy, rests upon this great truth that the Negro did not, never will be equal to the white man. Men think like that today. Anybody who is spouting this thing about DEI and only white men could go into these positions, they're quoting and thinking like this gentleman and those who fought in that Civil War, who were traitors to the American system. That slavery's subordination to a superior race is the Negro's natural and normal condition. This new government, the Confederacy, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. This is how I ended the last show, but I want you to reiterate this type of thinking that we had to deal with in America, and we're still dealing with remnants of it to this very day. If you talk to anybody who believes in that Confederate ideology and carry that flag proudly, this is what they're representing, which is an insult to people that look like me or anybody else. 189,000 black men fought against that, okay? Under the American flag. They fought against the American flag. Let's go on to the next one. Now, this gentleman, you might not know, or some of you might, but this was the Jefferson Davis. He is the president of the Confederacy. Let's go on to see what he had to say. In his first inaugural address and other wartime communication, Davis accused the North of aiming to destroy Southern property worth millions of dollars. Who do you think he was talking about? Us, black people. Outright referenced enslaved people as property. Davis also justified slavery on religious, economic, and historical grounds, sometimes even suggested that African Americans were destined for bondage and that slavery was civilized. When you hear people accusing us of DEI or not, or saying that we don't have the mental acuity, or we couldn't fly, or when we were in World War I, we were denied that, we were given problems when we tried to fly. We couldn't even lead our own men during the Civil War. We had to have a white man in front because we couldn't handle that or couldn't shoot. It's this kind of nonsense we had to deal with that came from colonial times, okay? They're just the children of the children of the children of the children who started the slave code. So they had to justify it with these type of things. And believe me, it still exists to this day. Let's go on to the next. Okay, for those of you who say, well, it was just for heritage, or the reason the Civil War came had nothing to do with slavery. Come on. These states that went with the Confederacy wrote in their state legislation justification for going into the Civil War, just like Davis and Alexander, okay, said that the reason that the Confederacy was created. Here's the justification by each state, and I'm not going to give you all the 11 states, but there's a few of them. South Carolina, which was the hotbed, where Fort Sumter is located. They said this: the election of a man to his high office of President of the United States, whose opinion and purpose are hostile to slavery. Okay, so that means you talk about Lincoln and those who in the North who were against the enslavement. This is what they justified as their excuse for going to war and separated and breaking up the Union. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is from Louisiana. The people of the slaveholding states are bound together by the same necessity and determination to preserve African slavery. They are saying it in their justification for leaving. And, this is what? Let's go on to the next. This is Mississippi. Opposition is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. A blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. All these excuses boiled around the enslavement and the uncompensated labor of black people. This is the original sin of America. And until we face this truth and stop twisting ourselves into pretzels, you should understand you're not being told this. This has all been written. Why? How many of you have seen this in your classrooms when you talk about the Civil War? They left the Union. That's about all you hear. But if you read why they left the Union, they will tell you. They didn't hide. Let's go on to the next. Okay, this is the great state of Texas, where I'm at. All white men and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights, that the servitude of the African race as existing in the states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free. It's somehow beneficial to us to be enslaved. What nonsense. And it's abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator, that God ordained this. This is the kind of mentality that still exists. And until we deal with this original sin, we're going to have the issues that you're still dealing with in 2025. Let's go on to the next. And it ain't only in the South. This is how Lincoln thought about black people. He said this in a speech, I think in the 1850s. You and we are different races. We have between us a broader difference than exists between almost any other two races. There's only one race, folks, the human race, and the earliest representation of that race is African. Let's get that straight. Whether it is right or wrong, I need not discuss, but this physical difference is a great disadvantage to us both. And I think your race suffers very greatly, many of them, by living among us, while ours suffers from your presence. This is Lincoln. In a word, we suffer on each side. If this is admitted, it affords a reason at least why we should be separated. And Lincoln was a very good proponent of senators and colonizing, during the colonizing movement. Even during his presidency, the first term, he tried to get funds to set up colonies in either Panama or other places. He wanted to get rid of us at first. This during his first term. So come on. I know you talk about Father Lincoln, but he was still white and part of the white system, okay? And he was still a man of his time. Let's go on to the next. The first explicit legal distinction, the Oxford English Dictionary notes the adjective white as meaning a white man, a person of race distinguished by a light complexion, first appeared in 1671. I told you the founding generations in America is where racism came. It started from the onset, okay? In the American colonial usage, okay? Let's go on to the next. The first use of the word whiteness, or a legal distinction based on being white as a standard between black and white people in colonial America, emerged in the late 17th century. specifically in Virginia. Laws before the 1670s distinguished people primarily by religion, characteristics. You're a Frenchman, an Englishman, you're a Spaniard, whatever. But the term white started to appear in legal settings around the time of the Bacon Rebellion and soon after as a racial division hardened into law. Again, it was by law that whiteness came and the caste system was established. The Constitution just codified it, but it started going back to the colonial times. You never hear that again in your history classes, okay? But racism was established when you have one power group by law dominating another group, okay? And this is how it started, going back to the 1600s. Okay, so you're wondering why Davis and Stevens, Alexander Stevens, the Confederate vice president, thought the way they were, because they were beneficiaries of generation of this kind of thinking. 100,000. All right, how many people died during the Civil War? Soldiers that are known, something like over 700,000 men died over this kind of ideology. Okay? One fighting for, one fighting against group. All right? And we're still dealing with that kind of ideology about the dominance of whiteness. Let's go on to the next. The Virginia colonial legislature began writing laws that created distinct legal categories between people of African descent, black people, and people of European descent, white people, during the late 1600s. Particularly in the 1680s. These early laws did not always use the word whiteness itself, but clearly defined legal rights and constraints by racial identity. That's racism. It was a construct, and whiteness is a construct of America. Okay, if you're white, or what you define as white by law, you have particular rights that people that look like me did not have. How could this be the land of the free, as we are being taught in school? How could it be the United States where we are separated by laws, distinct laws, like I said in the first show, solid boundaries, okay? But who was always in control? White people. I'm not saying it to hurt anybody. This is history. This is why they don't want you to understand black history, because this is how it looks like from our perspective. Let's go on to the next. The so-called Edict of Maryland in the 1600s, when referring to the rights of black people, is not associated with any single formal edict called by that name, but referred to a set of legislative acts, especially the 1664 Maryland slave law that fundamentally restricts the rights and status of black people in the colonies. These laws marked the official shift from indentured servitude, where you could, after 7 years or so, black and white people were given their so-called freedom, okay? But after this time, black people were made enslaved permanently. Black people to the legal recognition and enforcement of lifelong inheritable slavery based on race. This is America. All men are created equal. They don't match. Let's go on. Further laws in the late 1700th century continued to strip both enslaved and free black people of rights. You think what's going on now is anything new for us? We were dealing with this stuff for hundreds of years. We try to warn you in 2024. We recognize what our ancestors have been going through, but did you listen? Did you listen? This is why we speak the way we speak. This is why we react the way we react as people of African descent, because we know our history. You might not, but we know it. Let's go on to the next. The legal framework created a presumption that all black and mixed race individuals not born of white women were slaves for life. Do you know what I mean by mixed race? That didn't mean if the master created a baby when he raped an enslaved woman, there were laws that said he would not get charged with rape. But that baby, even though it was half his, like Sally Hemings and her children and her brothers and sisters, who were related to Thomas Jefferson, wife, because her father, Thomas Jefferson's wife's father, was the person that raped her mother, and produced Sally Hemings. So the relationship that Jefferson had with Sally Hemings, he was dealing with his wife's half-sister, and she was 14 years old. You know how I feel about that. We're talking about young girls and older rich white men today. I'm not going to mention the case, but you know what I'm talking about. It was going on back then. You forgot about the black women had to deal with that, kind of trauma. Let's go on to the next one. Virginia's 1705 Act, okay, the act concerning servants and slaves codified sharp distinctions based on European or African descent and eventually described who was defined as white. The law articulated social, economic, and civil standards that separated white from non-whites by law, laying groundwork for later use of whiteness as a standard, okay, of rights. Now you understand what that poem meant at the beginning of this show, okay? All right? That's the thing we have to deal with, America, or it's just going to get worse. That is a disease that was infected us and this country for hundreds of years, America. Let's go on to the next one. The concept of that whiteness determined legal rights and status, namely that white people were free, had rights, and could not be enslaved because of their ancestry, became explicit in the colonial statutes after 1680, and especially the slave codes of 1705 Virginia and other colonies. So you're wondering why the Confederacy thought that they had the right to enslave us? It was codified by law. And why they thought that somehow they were better by the time that ideology got to their young minds when they were children, this was already built into the society. It's built into the culture. American white culture was established based on race. This is hard to talk about, but when you have an infection, it's not always pretty, and sometimes it's very painful, but you need to clean that out in order to heal it. Okay, America is not healed yet, as you can see by what's going on around you today. Let's go on to the next. The direct use of whiteness as a legal standard first appeared in colonial Virginia's law by the early 1700s. Though the transition from ethnic or religious to explicit, when you talk about ethnic, well, you were French, you were British, that's how people were fighting, and Europeans were fighting each other based on ethnicity for thousands of years on that continent. So nothing changed, but it made a switch when they became white, okay? And then we became black for economic reasons, but it became part of the culture. Let's go on to the next. 40 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence own other people or enslaved. Let's go on to the next. The Negro business is a great object with us. It is to the trade of this country as the soul is to the body, and without it, no house can gain a proper stability. John Clay, he was a merchant. This is the mentality of what was going on in America. I got more, but I'm gonna stop it here. I want you to understand that the only way you can deal with injustice is through an informed mind. That's how a psychologist can help you, when you talk to them, okay? America still needs to face this truth. We can't hide, we can't deal with the cognitive dissonance where we push and deny and bend. But I'm gonna leave it here. So until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.